The Arizona Territory, 1885. Dust swirled across the barren landscape as Elena Blackhawk knelt beside her father's fresh grave. The debts he left behind were more than just numbers. They were shackles waiting to claim her. 3 days to pay, they'd said. 3 days before they'd take everything, including her. Miles away, a lone figure rode toward town, unaware his path would soon cross with hers. Thomas Ryder hadn't planned on staying in Shadow Creek, but fate had different ideas. When their worlds collided outside the general store, her tears fell like summer rain on parched earth. Could a stranger's promise truly stand against men who collected debts in blood? Will Thomas's protection be enough when her father's creditors come calling? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena clutched the silver locket containing her mother's portrait as she trudged up the dirt path to her cabin. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, matching the weight in her chest. Her father's funeral had drawn few mourners. Joseph Blackhawk had gambled away most of his friendships long before his heart gave out. The cabin stood alone on the edge of Shadow Creek, neither fully in town nor fully on tribal land, much like Elena herself, half Apache in a world that demanded choosing sides. She pushed open the creaking door, immediately reaching for the herbs hanging from the ceiling rafters, lavender and sage to calm her spirit just as her mother had taught her. He left nothing but trouble, she whispered to the empty room, opening the locket to gaze at her mother's serene face. Ayana Blackhawk had been gone 8 years now, taken by the influenza that swept through the reservation. Since then, Elena had watched her father's slow decline into bottles and card games. The memory of yesterday's visitors made her hands tremble. They'd arrived before her father's body was cold in the ground. 2 men from Blackwood Ranch, their polished boots and cold eyes marking them as men who collected debts for a living. "Mr. Blackwood sends his condolences," the taller one had said, not bothering to remove his hat. "Also sends his reminder that your father's debt transfers to his next of kin." "There must be some mistake," Elena had protested. "My father couldn't have borrowed that much." The shorter man had simply dropped a leather folder on her table. $3,000, plus interest. "Your father put up this property as collateral." "That's impossible. This land is worth more than you know," the tall one had interrupted. "Water rights alone make it valuable. You have 3 days to produce payment in full." Now Elena heated water for tea, trying to calm her racing thoughts. $3,000 might as well be 3 million. She had precisely $27 hidden beneath a floorboard, her entire savings from selling herbal remedies in town. She owned nothing of value except her mother's locket and the knowledge of healing plants passed down through generations of Apache women. Knowledge that earned her suspicious glances from townspeople even as they sought her cures for their ailments. As twilight descended, Elena lit the oil lamp and spread her herbs on the table. Perhaps she could earn something by preparing extra tinctures to sell tomorrow. She worked methodically, her fingers moving with practiced precision despite her exhaustion. A knock at the door startled her. No one visited after dark, especially not out here. "Who's there?" she called, reaching for her father's old hunting knife. "Mrs. Holloway's boy," came a young voice. "Ma sent me. The baby's coming early, and she's bleeding." Elena exhaled. Martha Holloway was one of the few white women who treated her with respect. "Wait there," she instructed, quickly gathering birth herbs and clean cloths. She tucked the locket safely inside her dress. Perhaps helping bring new life into the world would remind her that even the darkest night eventually yields to dawn, and tomorrow she would find a way to fight for her home. The boy shifted nervously on the porch. "Ma says to hurry, and she says to be careful coming through town. Blackwood's men are drinking at the saloon." Elena nodded grimly. The debt wouldn't wait, but neither would a baby eager to enter the world. She extinguished the lamp and stepped into the cooling night air, offering a silent prayer to her mother's spirit for guidance. How could she know that miles away as she followed the boy toward town, a dust-covered stranger was dismounting his horse outside the Shadow Creek saloon, about to become entangled in her desperate situation? Thomas Ryder's worn leather journal sat heavily in his saddlebag as he hitched his horse outside the Shadow Creek saloon. The book contained 7 years of wandering places he'd been, people he'd met, troubles he'd seen. Some pages were stained with whiskey, others with less innocent fluids. He never intended to stay anywhere long enough to fill more than a few pages. He adjusted his gun belt and brushed trail dust from his coat. Shadow Creek looked like a dozen other frontier towns he'd passed through. One main street, false-fronted buildings, and likely more secrets than saints. The saloon's batwing doors swung easily beneath his push. Conversation dimmed momentarily as unfamiliar faces assessed the newcomer. Thomas kept his expression neutral, eyes taking inventory without seeming to stare. 3 men at a corner table caught his attention, better dressed than the others, with the comfortable posture of men who believed they owned more than just their chairs. "Whiskey," Thomas told the barkeep, placing a coin on the counter. Passing through, the man asked, pouring a generous shot. "That's the general idea." Thomas lifted the glass, letting the amber liquid burn away the trail dust in his throat. "Shame, town could use men who look capable." Thomas offered a non-committal grunt. He'd learned that being capable often meant being useful to someone else's purposes. The saloon doors opened again, admitting a weather-beaten man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Thought that was your horse," the lawman said, approaching Thomas. "Been a long time, Ryder." Thomas stiffened slightly. "Sheriff Holloway. Didn't know you'd settled here." "Going on 5 years now." Holloway gestured to the barkeep for a drink. "Army life got old." "That it did." Thomas turned to face his former comrade in arms. They'd ridden together briefly during the Apache campaigns, not long enough to be friends, but enough to recognize each other's measure. The well-dressed men in the corner were watching their exchange with interest. "Need a deputy?" Thomas asked, half joking. "Could use a hand, actually. Just temporary." Holloway's voice lowered. "Got a situation brewing." Before Thomas could respond, shouting erupted from outside, a woman's voice, desperate and afraid, followed by male laughter. Thomas's hand instinctively moved toward his gun. Holloway sighed. "And there it is." They stepped outside to find a young woman backing away from 2 men, the same well-dressed types from the corner table. She clutched a basket of what looked like herb bundles, several scattered in the dirt at her feet. "Please, I was just trying to reach Mrs. Holloway," the woman said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "Her baby's coming." "Thought you might want to discuss your father's obligations first," the taller man said, moving closer. "Mr. Blackwood is a patient man, but not infinitely so." Thomas noted her features, clearly half Apache, with striking dark eyes currently wide with distress. Despite her obvious fear, she held herself with dignity. "My wife sent for Miss Blackhawk specifically," Holloway interrupted, stepping between them. "Your business can wait." The men exchanged glances. "Sure, Sheriff. Just a friendly reminder." The taller one tipped his hat mockingly toward the woman. 3 days, Miss Blackhawk. Not a minute more." As they sauntered back toward the saloon, the woman bent to gather her scattered herbs. Thomas knelt to help, picking up a bundle of dried leaves. "Thank you," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "Elena, this is Thomas Ryder," Holloway said. "An old acquaintance." "Thomas, Elena Blackhawk." She glanced up then, her gaze briefly meeting his before darting away. "Your wife needs me, Sheriff. I'll take you to her." Holloway turned to Thomas. "Stop by my office tomorrow if you're interested in that temporary work." Thomas watched them hurry down the street, the woman's dark hair swinging across her back. Whatever trouble she was in had something to do with the men from the saloon and someone named Blackwood. He returned to the bar, ordered another whiskey, and pulled out his journal. "Shadow Creek, Arizona Territory," he wrote, adding the date. Something told him he might be adding more pages than usual this time. The pearl-handled letter opener lay on Silas Blackwood's massive oak desk like a miniature sword. A gift from a banker in Tucson, it had opened hundreds of foreclosure notices and property deeds. Today, it would cut through Elena Blackhawk's last hopes. "Miss Blackhawk," Blackwood said, not rising as she was shown into his study. "I trust you've brought payment." Elena stood rigidly in the doorway of Blackwood Ranch's main house, her hands clenched at her sides. The 20-mile ride had left her exhausted, but she kept her spine straight and her gaze level. "Mr. Blackwood, I've come to request more time." Blackwood sighed theatrically. He was a handsome man of 50, with silver temples and the smooth hands of someone who'd never worked a day in the sun. "Your father had plenty of time, years in fact." "My father was ill in his mind. You knew that when you let him keep gambling." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Joseph Blackhawk was a grown man who understood the terms of our arrangement. He picked up the letter opener, turning it so sunlight from the window caught the pearl handle. $3,000, due in 2 days now. "That's impossible," Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The property isn't worth half that." "Oh, but it is." Blackwood rose, walking to a large map of the territory mounted on his wall. "Your little parcel sits at the junction of Crawford Creek and the Western Trail. Perfect location for a trading post, or perhaps a toll station." He turned, eyes calculating. "Of course, there might be other arrangements we could come to." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I'd rather lose everything," Elena said coldly. "That can certainly be arranged." Blackwood returned to his desk. 2 days, Miss Blackhawk. After that, my men will escort you off the property. Where you go is of no concern to me." Elena left the ranch with her hands shaking and bile rising in her throat. By the time she reached Shadow Creek, afternoon was fading into evening. She tied her horse outside the general store, hoping to sell some of her remedies before closing time. The storekeeper's wife, Martha Holloway, greeted her warmly. "Elena, how did the baby fare?" "Strong lungs," Elena managed to smile. "Your grandson will thrive." "Thanks to you." Martha squeezed her hand. "I've told everyone how you saved them both." "I have more tinctures," Elena said, opening her basket. "For fever and women's troubles." Martha's face fell. "I'm sorry, dear. Mr. Peterson, he owns the store. He says we can't buy from you anymore." "What?" "Blackwood's men were in this morning. Said anyone doing business with you would lose their credit at the bank." Martha looked around nervously. "My husband says it's not right, but we can't afford to cross Blackwood." Elena nodded numbly. "Of course." Blackwood controlled the bank, which meant he controlled most businesses in town. She thanked Martha and stumbled outside, clutching her basket of now worthless remedies. The reality crashed over her like a wave. No money, no prospects, no way to keep her home. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks as she sank onto the boardwalk steps. That's where Thomas Ryder found her, half an hour later. He'd spent the day talking with Sheriff Holloway, learning about Blackwood's grip on Shadow Creek. Now laden with supplies from the general store, he paused at the sight of Elena's hunched figure. "Miss Blackhawk?" She looked up, hastily wiping her tears. "Mr. Ryder, are you hurt?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Only my pride," she gestured vaguely, "and my future." Thomas set down his packages and sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "The debt? $3,000 by tomorrow evening," she said dully. "Impossible. What happens if you don't pay?" "I lose everything. My home. The land my mother's people considered sacred." She met his eyes, and Blackwood hinted at alternatives that I will never accept. Something hardened in Thomas's expression. "No," he said quietly. "You won't have to." "Why would you care?" Elena asked, too exhausted for diplomacy. "You're just passing through." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "Some things a man can't ride past." He stood, offering his hand. "Your father's debt will kill you, one way or another. Let me help. Elena stared at his outstretched hand, then at his face, weathered, serious, and somehow trustworthy despite being a stranger. It's my problem now, Thomas said simply. And against all reason, Elena found herself reaching for his hand. The lantern cast long shadows across Elena's cabin as Thomas examined the crude property map spread across her table. His fingertip traced the boundaries of her land, lingering on the creek junction Blackwood had mentioned. Your father's original loan was for $500, Thomas asked. Elena nodded, pouring herbal tea into chipped cups. For medicine when my mother fell ill. After she died, he kept borrowing, gambling to escape his grief, and somehow it became 3,000. Blackwood's interest rates are creative. She set a cup before him. Why are you helping me, Miss Ryder? Thomas didn't answer immediately, sipping the bitter tea instead. I've seen Blackwood's type before, men who build empires on others' misfortunes. That doesn't explain why you'd involve yourself. His weathered face revealed nothing. Let's say I have my reason. Elena studied him across the flickering light. This stranger who'd appeared from nowhere, offering help when everyone else had turned away. If you're expecting payment of a different sort, I'm not Blackwood, Thomas cut in sharply. He softened his tone. I expect nothing from you, Miss Blackhawk. Elena, she corrected. If you're fighting my battles, you might as well use my name. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Elena, then, outside, an owl called into the darkness. Elena wrapped her shawl tighter. So what do we do? I can't produce $3,000 by tomorrow. We need leverage, Thomas said, returning to the map. Something Blackwood wants more than your land. There's nothing. There's always something. Thomas folded the map carefully. For tonight I'll camp nearby. Keep watch. Elena bristled. I can protect myself. Against one man, perhaps. Blackwood won't send just one. As if summoned by his words, horses approached outside. Elena extinguished the lantern with a swift motion, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by embers in the fireplace. Back door, she whispered, reaching for her father's shotgun propped in the corner. Thomas moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 2 riders, armed. A heavy knock rattled the door. Miss Blackhawk, message from Mr. Blackwood. Elena's hands tightened on the shotgun. Thomas gently took it from her, checking that it was loaded before handing it back. Stay inside, he murmured, drawing his revolver. Answer them, but don't open the door. What is it? Elena called, positioning herself beside the window. Miss Blackwood is feeling generous. He's authorized us to accept partial payment. Just $500 tonight, as a show of good faith. Thomas shook his head silently. A trap. I don't have $500, Elena replied. That's unfortunate. Bootsteps creaked on the porch. Perhaps we should discuss alternatives. Thomas slipped out the back door, disappearing into the darkness. There are no alternatives, Elena said firmly. Tell Mr. Blackwood I'll see him tomorrow with my answer. Mr. Blackwood doesn't like to be kept waiting, ma'am. A sudden commotion erupted outside, a thud, cursing, the sound of a brief struggle, then silence. Your friend's business with Mr. Blackwood is concluded, Thomas's voice called calmly. He's riding back to deliver the message. Elena opened the door cautiously. Thomas stood on her porch, revolver holstered, straightening his coat. One of Blackwood's men was riding away at a gallop. The other lay on the ground, groaning and clutching his arm. You broke his collarbone, she observed, medical training automatically assessing the injury. He'll live. Thomas hauled the man to his feet. Tell Blackwood that Miss Blackhawk is under my protection now. He deals with me. The man spat on the ground but climbed awkwardly onto his horse with his good arm. You're dead, mister. You just don't know it yet. He wheeled his horse around and galloped after his companion. Thomas watched until they disappeared into the darkness. They'll be back, with more men. Then we don't have much time. Elena retrieved a small leather pouch from inside the cabin. She pulled out a brass compass, the one possession her father had never gambled away. This was my grandfather's. He was an army scout, not worth much in money, but it always points true. She pressed it into Thomas's hand. For your help tonight. Thomas studied the old compass, its needle quivering slightly, before settling on north. Keep it. We both need direction right now. He returned it gently. I'll make camp within earshot. First light, we start looking for leverage. Elena nodded, clutching the compass. Why do I trust you when I've just met you? Maybe, Thomas said quietly, because when you're drowning, you don't question the hand that pulls you to shore. She watched him disappear into the darkness, wondering if she'd just found salvation or another form of destruction. The worn Bible lay open on Reverend Miller's pulpit, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze from the open church windows. Sunday morning service had ended an hour ago, but the Reverend remained, speaking in hushed tones with Sheriff Holloway and Thomas. Blackwood's loan terms are unconscionable, the Reverend said, his finger tracing a passage about moneylenders. But I'm afraid my influence extends only to matters of the spirit, not the law. The law is whatever Blackwood says it is, Sheriff Holloway replied wearily. Judge Clark owes him money, same as half the county. Thomas leaned against a pew. There must be others who've suffered from his schemes. Plenty, the sheriff confirmed. But they're either ruined and gone, or too afraid to speak up. The church door opened, admitting Elena alongside Martha Holloway. The sheriff's wife clutched a small collection basket. $2.30, Martha announced, her disappointment evident. That's all anyone would contribute. Elena's face remained composed, though Thomas noted the tightness around her eyes. It's more than I had before. Thank you for trying. People are scared, the Reverend said apologetically. Blackwood's reach is long, and getting longer, Sheriff Holloway added. Word is he's buying up land all along the territorial road. Your property is just one piece of a bigger plan. Thomas straightened. What plan? Railroad's coming, the sheriff said. Not announced yet, but the surveyors were through last month. Anyone owning land along the proposed route stands to make a fortune. Understanding dawned on Elena's face. That's why he's so determined, and why 3,000 is actually a bargain, the Reverend added grimly. That land will be worth 10 times that once the railroad announcement is official. Thomas watched Elena absorb this information, admiring her composure, despite the crushing weight of her situation. I should get back, she said finally. I've herbs to prepare before tomorrow. I'll walk with you, Thomas offered. Outside, Shadow Creek's main street was unusually quiet for a Sunday. Thomas noticed curtains twitching as they passed, faces appearing briefly before disappearing again. They're watching, Elena said quietly, wondering if helping me is worth risking Blackwood's displeasure. Is it always like this? It's gotten worse. Blackwood arrived 3 years ago, bought the bank, then the saloon. She nodded toward a well-dressed man hurrying across the street to avoid them. That's Miss Peterson, who owns the general store. He used to buy my remedies until Risdery. As they passed the saloon, the doors swung open. 3 cowboys emerged, stopping abruptly at the sight of Elena and Thomas. Their hands hovered near their gun belts. Miss Blackhawk, the tallest one, drawled. Miss Blackwood was disappointed. You didn't accept his generous offer last night. Thomas stepped slightly forward. Miss Blackhawk is considering all her options. The cowboy spat tobacco juice into the dust. Ain't many options left, mister. Except the one she keeps refusing. His eyes traveled lewdly over Elena. Shame, really. Pretty little half-breed like her could have a comfortable arrangement. Thomas's hand moved to his revolver, but Elena gripped his arm. Not here, she murmured. Not now. The cowboy laughed. Listen to your squaw, stranger. You got till sundown tomorrow. Then we come collecting one way or another. They swaggered past, deliberately bumping Thomas's shoulder. I could have handled them, Thomas said once they were out of earshot, and be hanged for murder. Blackwood owns the judge, remember. Elena released his arm. Violence won't solve this. Sometimes it's the only language men like that understand. They walked in silence until reaching the edge of town. A young Apache boy waited there, sitting astride a small paint pony. He straightened when he saw Elena. Little Fox, she greeted him in surprise. What brings you here? The boy slid from his pony, glancing warily at Thomas. He handed Elena a small object wrapped in buckskin. "Grandmother sends this," he said in Apache. "She says the council will not help, but she remembers your mother." Elena unwrapped the package. Inside lay an intricately beaded hair ornament, a curved piece of polished bone with colorful beads forming a thunderbird pattern. "My mother's wedding gift," Elena whispered, patting it reverently. "I thought it was lost." "Grandmother kept it safe," the boy said. "She says it will protect you in dark times." Elena thanked him in Apache, and the boy remounted his pony, disappearing back toward the hills. Thomas watched her cradle the ornament. "Your mother's people, my grandmother. The tribal council wants nothing to do with me since my father was white." She tucked the ornament carefully into her pocket. "But my grandmother remembers. This belonged to my mother when she married my father, against her family's wishes. Will it help?" Elena's smile was sad. "Not with Blackwood, but it reminds me that my mother faced impossible choices too. She squared her shoulders, and she never surrendered." Thomas studied her face, seeing the determination beneath her exhaustion. "Then neither will." They continued toward her cabin as the sun began its descent, shadows lengthening across the dusty path. Behind them, Shadow Creek seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The half-carved wooden horse stood frozen mid-gallop on Elena's porch railing. Her father had started it months before his death, one of his rare sober projects, but never finished. Like so many things in Joseph Blackhawk's life, it remained incomplete, waiting for a conclusion that would never come. Thomas ran his fingers over the smooth contours as sunset painted the hills gold. "Your father made this. He was talented when the drink didn't have him." Elena hung freshly bundled herbs from the porch beams. "He carved beautiful things for my mother when they first married. Said he wanted to create beauty to match hers." Thomas examined the unfinished figure. "What happened to him?" Elena's hands stilled. "After my mother died, he broke. Started drinking, gambling. Said the pain was too much." She resumed her work. "I tried to help him, but he didn't want help, and Blackwood took advantage. Blackwood gives men enough rope to hang themselves, then charges their families for the rope." She secured the last herb bundle. "My father knew what he was doing to us, but couldn't stop. He'd promised to change, then disappear for days, and return with more debts." Thomas set the wooden horse back on the railing. "My father was similar, not gambling, but the bottle. Mean drunk too." Elena glanced at him, surprised by the personal revelation. "Is that why you left home?" "One reason." Thomas leaned against the porch post. "Joined the cavalry at 17, seemed better than waiting for him to kill my mother or me in one of his rages." "The cavalry," Elena's expression cooled slightly. "They've killed many of my mother's people." "I know." Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I was at Skeleton Canyon." Elena drew back. "The massacre. I was there, but I didn't participate." His jaw tightened. "It's why I left the service. Some orders a man can't follow and still call himself human." They stood in silence as purple shadows crept across the yard. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely cry echoing through the cooling air. "Why are you telling me this?" Elena finally asked. "So you understand I've seen evil wearing many uniforms, military business suits, badges. Blackwood is just another version." Elena studied him, as if seeing beneath his weathered exterior for the first time. "And what are you, Thomas Ryder?" "Just a drifter, with a convenient conscience. I'm a man trying to balance scales that may never balance." He straightened. "But right now, I'm also your only ally." The gravity of her situation settled over Elena again. "Tomorrow is the deadline. I've been thinking about that." Thomas pulled a folded document from his coat. "The sheriff found something interesting in the county records. Your mother was Apache, from the Los Alamos band." "Yes. Why?" This treaty, signed 12 years ago, establishes that tribal members retain mineral and water rights, even on sold lands. He handed her the paper. Your mother's name is listed among the tribal members. Elena scanned the document, hope flaring briefly before fading. But I'm only half Apache. The tribe doesn't recognize me. Your grandmother does. And legally you inherited your mother's tribal rights. Thomas tapped the paper. Those rights transfer to whoever owns the land. If Blackwood takes your property, he gets the water and mineral rights too, which could be worth far more than the land itself, with the railroad coming. Understanding dawned on Elena's face. So if I could prove these rights are separate, we create doubt. Doubt creates delay. Delay gives us time to find a solution. Elena gripped the treaty, her mind racing. But how do we prove it? The tribal council won't support me. Your grandmother might, and the treaty is federal, not tribal. It stands regardless of the council's position. For the first time since her father's death, Elena felt a flicker of genuine hope. This could work. It's a start. Thomas glanced toward the darkening hills. We should leave at first light to speak with your grandmother. Elena nodded, then hesitated. You should stay here tonight. It'll be cold. And she caught herself. There's a storage room off the kitchen. It's small but dry. Thomas understood her concern went beyond hospitality. Blackwood's deadline loomed, and his men might not wait until tomorrow. Thank you. As night descended fully, they sat on the porch sharing a simple meal of cornbread and beans. The wooden horse watched over them, frozen in its eternal mid-stride gallop, a reminder of things left unfinished, and the promise that some journeys once begun must find their way to completion. My mother used to say that every path has its thorns. Elena murmured, gazing at the stars emerging overhead, but only those who turn back feel their full sting. Thomas followed her gaze upward. Wise woman. Yes, Elena said softly. She would have liked you. The unexpected compliment hung in the night air between them, bridging worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. The eagle feather quill moved gracefully across the parchment as Lawyer Bennett drafted the document. His office, the only law practice in Shadow Creek, smelled of dust and old books, with morning sunlight streaming through grimy windows. This injunction formally contests the debt based on potentially fraudulent interest calculations. Bennett explained, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose. It also asserts your inherited tribal water rights remain separate from any land transfer. Elena watched anxiously as Thomas leaned over the lawyer's shoulder, reading each line. Will it stop Blackwood? She asked. Bennett sighed, setting down the quill. Temporarily, perhaps. But Judge Clark, he trailed off. Owes Blackwood money, Thomas finished. Like everyone else. Unfortunately, Bennett blotted the ink carefully. Still, legal proceedings take time. Even a compromised judge must maintain appearances. Thomas straightened. How much time? A week? Perhaps 2 if we're fortunate. Bennett handed the quill to Elena. Your signature here, Miss Blackhawk. Elena signed with a steady hand, years of precise work with healing herbs evident in her controlled script. Now what? She asked, returning the quill. I'll file this immediately. You should prepare for Blackwood's response. Bennett removed his spectacles. It won't be pleasant. Outside, the morning bustle of Shadow Creek continued, though people gave them a wide berth. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone knew today was Blackwood's deadline. We need to visit your grandmother, Thomas said, as they walked toward the general store. Her testimony about your mother's tribal status could strengthen our position. Elena nodded. It's a half-day's ride to the reservation. We should. She stopped abruptly as Blackwood himself emerged from the bank across the street. Unlike his men, Silas Blackwood dressed like an Eastern businessman. Tailored suit, polished boots, gold watch chain gleaming in the sunlight. He spotted them immediately, his smile tightening as he crossed the dusty street. Miss Blackhawk, I expected to see you at my office this morning. His gaze shifted to Thomas. And Mr. Ryder, I've heard much about you. Nothing good, I hope, Thomas replied evenly. Blackwood chuckled. Cavalry deserter. Drifter. Occasional gun hand. His eyes narrowed. Not the sort of company a respectable young woman should keep. I'll choose my own company, Elena said coldly. Indeed, Blackwood straightened his cuffs. Just as you've chosen to file legal papers instead of honoring your father's obligations. Thomas stepped forward. How did you know about the injunction? Bennett hasn't filed it yet. Shadow Creek has no secrets from me, Mr. Ryder. Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. Just as I know you visited county records yesterday, searching for loopholes. Elena felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Blackwood had informants everywhere. The debt is illegitimate, she stated firmly. The interest rates were your father signed the agreements, Blackwood interrupted. Everyone, he understood the terms. A desperate man will sign anything, Thomas said. Doesn't make it right. Blackwood regarded him with amused contempt. Right? This is business, sir. But since you've involved yourself, he turned to Elena. I've reconsidered the situation. You now have until sundown to vacate the property. My men will escort you off permanently. The injunction, Elena began, hasn't been filed yet. Blackwood checked his gold pocket watch. And Judge Clark left for Tucson this morning. Won't return for a week. Unfortunate timing. Thomas's hand moved subtly toward his gun. You knew. I know everything that happens in my town, Mr. Ryder. Blackwood replaced his watch. Sundown, Miss Blackhawk. Bring only what you can carry. The rest stays. He tipped his hat and continued down the street, where two mounted men waited, his ever-present security. He had this planned all along, Elena whispered. The judge, the timing, Thomas's expression was grim. He's forcing our hand. They returned quickly to Bennett's office, but the lawyer only confirmed what they already knew. Without a judge, the injunction was merely paper. What do we do now? Elena asked, as they left town, heading back to her cabin to prepare for whatever came next. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his face hard with concentration. We need more than legal maneuvers. We need leverage. What kind of leverage? Information. Blackwood didn't build his empire overnight. Men like him leave victims and evidence in their wake. Thomas glanced at the position of the sun. We have about 8 hours until sundown. To do what? To find Blackwood's weakness. Thomas's eyes held a dangerous determination. Every man has one. Elena studied him, seeing something new in his expression. A calculating intensity that reminded her he was no ordinary drifter. Who are you really, Thomas Ryder? She asked, quietly. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Today, I'm the man standing between you and Blackwood. Tomorrow, he shrugged. Let's make sure you have a tomorrow first. As they rode, the eagle feather quill in Bennett's office continued to dry, its formal legal phrases now seeming as insubstantial as dust in the wind. Words on paper wouldn't save Elena's hope. Only action remained, and time was running out. The tattered ledger book lay open on Martha Holloway's kitchen table, its yellowed pages covered with neat columns of figures. Steam rose from the coffee cups beside it, as Martha traced a finger down the entries. My husband keeps records of everything that passes through the store, she explained, voice low though they were alone in the house, including Blackwood's transactions. Elena leaned closer. These are all loans, payments most to people who suddenly changed their votes on the town council, or sold land for less than it was worth. Martha tapped a particular entry, like the Wilkerson Place, prime grazing land, sold for a pittance after their barn mysteriously burned. Thomas studied the patterns of payments. Blackwood's building more than a ranch. He's buying the whole territory piece by piece. And not always legally, Martha added, flipping to newer pages. See here, Judge Clark receives monthly consulting fees. Sheriff Banks from Apache Wells gets security payments. Elena frowned. Sheriff Banks, not Holloway. My James is the one honest lawman Blackwood couldn't buy. Martha's voice held quiet pride. That's why he has so little authority these days. The county sheriff handles anything important. Thomas copied several entries into a small note. This is evidence of corruption, but not enough to stop him taking Elena's land today. There's more. Martha glanced nervously at the window before pulling out a folded newspaper from beneath the ledger. This came from Tucson yesterday. The newspaper headline announced the official railroad route through the territory, a route that passed directly through Elena's property. The public announcement isn't due for 2 weeks, Martha explained. Blackwood must have inside information. That's why he's accelerated the deadline, Thomas said. Once this becomes public, the land values will soar. Elena's fingers tightened on the table edge. He's been planning this for years. My father's debts were just a convenient tool. Martha nodded grimly. You're not his only target. Half the properties along the route have been acquired through similar methods. A heavy knock at the front door made them all freeze. Martha quickly closed the ledger and slid it under the table. Martha, Sheriff Holloway's voice called. You. She exhaled with relief, hurrying to admit her husband. The sheriff entered, removing his hat, face drawn with concern. You need to leave town, he said without preamble. All of you. What's happened? Thomas asked. Blackwood's called in hired guns from Apache Wells. 6 men, including Jeb Tucker. Martha paled. The bounty hunter? The same. Holloway's gaze fixed on Thomas. He's also circulating a story that you're wanted for murder in Colorado. Says he has a telegram confirming it. That's a lie, Thomas said flatly. Doesn't matter. Sheriff Banks is ready to arrest you on Blackwood's word. Holloway turned to Elena, and he's told his men not to be particular about how they remove you from your property. Said accidents happen. Elena felt cold fear settle in her stomach. He wouldn't dare. A woman living alone on valuable land. Who'd question if you resisted and got hurt? Holloway's expression was grim. Your body might not even be found. Thomas's hand moved to his gun. I won't let that happen. You'll be outnumbered 7-1. Holloway shook his head. I can't help officially. Banks outranks me, but I can give you a head start. Martha clutched her husband's arm. Where can they go? Los Alamos Reservation, Elena said suddenly. My grandmother. The tribal lands are federal, not territorial. Blackwood has no authority there. Thomas nodded. It could buy us time to expose what he's doing. Take the back roads, Holloway advised. They're watching the main trails. Martha hurriedly packed bread and dried meat into a bundle. The newspaper, take it, and this. She pressed a small derringer into Elena's hands. It was my mother's. Outside they mounted fresh horses from Holloway's stable. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, promising at least 5 hours of daylight, 5 hours for Blackwood's men to find them before they reached tribal lands. We can't outrun them, Thomas said as they rode hard out of town. Not with this head start. We don't have to outrun them, Elena replied, adjusting her mother's beaded hair ornament, which she now wore openly. We just have to reach my grandmother's people. Thomas studied her profile, noting the determination that had replaced fear. Your father's daughter, after all. No, Elena corrected, urging her horse faster. My mother's. Behind them dust plumes rose from Shadow Creek as riders assembled. The hunt was beginning, with Elena and Thomas as the prey. Between them and safety lay 20 miles of open territory, and somewhere ahead, the boundary of the Los Alamos Reservation, if they could reach it in time. The ledger book remained hidden, under Martha's table, its damning evidence waiting to be revealed, if they survived long enough to use it. The worn hunting knife sliced cleanly through the leather strap as Elena fashioned a makeshift snare. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, securing the trap between 2 juniper trees, overlooking the narrow canyon trail. This won't stop them, Thomas observed from his position behind a boulder, rifle ready. It's not meant to. Elena tested the tension. Just slow them down. My mother taught me to use the land itself as protection. They had abandoned the main trail hours ago, cutting through rough country where horsemen would struggle to follow. The sun hung low now, painting the canyon walls in fiery hues. Behind them, dust clouds marked their pursuers' progress closer with each passing hour. How much farther to the reservation? Thomas asked. Those hills. Elena pointed to distant purple shadows. Another hour if we push hard. Thomas scanned the terrain, his cavalry training evident in his assessment. We won't make it. Not both of us. Elena secured the final knot. What do you mean? They're gaining. 2 riders can't outpace 7, not in this terrain. His expression hardened. I'll stay. Hold them back. You ride ahead. No, Elena sheathed her knife. I won't leave you to die for my fight. It became my fight when Blackwood brought in hired guns. Thomas checked his ammunition. Besides, your grandmother needs to hear about the treaty rights. That might save your land even if... He stopped himself. Even if we don't both survive, Elena finished. She touched the beaded ornament in her hair. My mother would say the spirits decide who lives and dies, not us. My experience suggests bullets have more say in the matter. Despite his words, Thomas's eyes softened. You have a future, Elena. Something worth protecting. So do you. Thomas looked away. Men like me don't plan for futures. The distant whinny of horses interrupted them. Elena grabbed Thomas's arm. They're closer than we thought. A quick glance confirmed her fear. Riders appearing at the canyon's mouth, still distant but moving fast. Go, Thomas urged. Now, I'll be right behind you after I spring the trap. Elena hesitated, then made a swift decision. She unsheathed her knife again and sliced off a lock of her hair, quickly braiding it into a thin cord. A token, she explained, pressing it into his palm. Apache warriors carried something of their loved ones into battle, for protection. Before Thomas could respond, she was on her horse, galloping toward the distant hills. He watched her for a moment, then turned back to the approaching riders, the braided hair secure in his shirt pocket. He positioned himself carefully, rifle ready. The trap wouldn't stop experienced gunmen, but it might create enough confusion for him to pick off 1 or 2. After that, Thomas pushed the thought away, one problem at a time. The riders entered the canyon at a trot, clearly tracking their trail. Thomas recognized Jeb Tucker, at the lead, a man with a reputation for bringing in bounties dead, rather than alive. Beside him rode one of Blackwood's regular men, with 5 hard-faced strangers following. Thomas waited until they reached the narrowest point, then fired a single shot into the canyon wall above them. The report echoed like thunder, startling the horses. Simultaneously he yanked the trigger rope for Elena's. The trap worked perfectly. A deadfall of rocks cascaded down, combined with a tangle of branches that sprang across the trail. Horses reared and men shouted as dust filled the narrow passage. Thomas fired twice more, deliberately aiming to wound rather than kill. A man fell, clutching his shoulder. Another dove for cover as his horse bolted. Its rider, Tucker, shouted. Spread out. Thomas fired his remaining shots methodically, forcing the men back into the canyon mouth, then mounted his horse and raced after Elena. They would regroup quickly, but he'd bought precious minutes. He rode hard, pushing his mount to its limits. Ahead, the reservation hills grew larger, their shadows lengthening across the desert floor. He could just make out Elena's figure in the distance. A shot cracked behind him, then another. Thomas hunched lower in the saddle as bullets whistled past. His horse stumbled slightly, but maintained its gallop. The sun touched the horizon, spreading blood-red light across the landscape. In the fading brightness, Thomas spotted movement to his left. Riders cutting across country to intercept them before they reached the reservation boundary. Tucker had split his forces. Thomas spurred forward, closing the distance to Elena. She turned at the sound of gunfire, her face paling as she understood their situation. They're flanking us, he shouted as he reached her. We need to make the boundary before they cut us off. Side by side they rode, horses lathered with exertion, the reservation hills tantalizingly close. Behind them, Tucker and 3 men gave chase. To their left, the other pursuers raced to intercept their path. As darkness gathered, Elena clutched her mother's ornament, silently praying to ancestors she'd never fully embraced. Thomas's hand dropped briefly to his shirt pocket, feeling the small braid of Elena's hair. For the first time in years, he found himself hoping for a future beyond the next sunrise. The sacred smoke from White Feather's ceremonial pipe curled toward the lodge ceiling as the elderly woman finished her story. Around her, tribal elders sat in stoic silence, their weathered faces revealing nothing of their thoughts. Elena and Thomas waited respectfully, exhausted from their narrow escape hours earlier. "So you see," Elena concluded in Apache, "my mother's treaty rights may be our only protection against this man Blackwood." White Feather, Elena's grandmother, passed the pipe to the eldest man present. Her eyes, remarkably like Elena's, studied her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "You come to us only in need," the head elder finally said in halting English. "When your father took Ayana from us, you became of his world, not ours." Elena felt the sting of his words but kept her posture straight. "I have never denied my mother's blood, nor claimed it," another elder countered. "Until it serves you." Thomas, though understanding nothing of the Apache words, recognized the tension. He had remained silent throughout the council, aware that his cavalry background would win him no favors here. White Feather spoke firmly in Apache. "My daughter's child has both worlds in her veins. She walks between, belonging to neither fully. This is not her choice, but her burden." She turned to Elena, switching to English for Thomas's benefit. "The treaty your mother signed is real. Her rights passed to you at birth. This paperman Blackwood cannot take what the Great Spirit has given. But will the tribal council support her claim?" Thomas asked carefully. A long silence followed. The elders exchanged glances, communicating in the subtle language of those who have deliberated together for decades. "The council does not recognize children of mixed blood," the head elder finally stated. "This is our way." Elena's heart sank, but White Feather was not finished. From beneath her blanket she withdrew an object wrapped in soft buckskin. Unwrapping it reverently, she revealed a ceremonial war club, small but exquisitely crafted from polished stone and wood, with eagle feathers and beads adorning the handle. "This belonged to your grandfather, who was war chief before the reservation," White Feather explained. "He gave it to your mother when she married the white man, saying her battles would be different, but no less worthy." She placed the club in Elena's hands. "I speak not for the council, but for your blood. I will testify to your lineage before any white man's court. The treaty protects you as it protected your mother." Thomas watched the exchange with growing hope. If you could put that in writing, a statement of Elena's heritage and rights under the treaty, it might give us legal standing. The head elder frowned. "Papers mean nothing. White men make promises on paper, then break them when gold or land is found." "True," Thomas acknowledged. "But papers give us time, and time is what we need right now." White Feather nodded slowly. "I will make this statement, not for the white man's law, but for my daughter's memory." As the elders dispersed, Elena remained kneeling before her grandmother, the war club cradled in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered in Apache. White Feather touched her cheek gently. "Your mother had your same spirit, fire and water together, soft enough to nourish but strong enough to shape stone over time." Outside the lodge, night had fully descended. Thomas stood guard near the entrance, watching for any sign that Blackwood's men had violated the reservation boundary. The tribal policeman had turned back Tucker and his men at the border, but Thomas didn't trust them to respect territorial lines for long. Elena emerged, carrying the war club and a folded paper bearing her grandmother's mark, and the tribal seal, not official council support, but a personal testimony that might carry weight with a federal judge. "Will it be enough?" she asked, Thomas quietly. "It's something more than we had before." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Your grandmother is formidable." A small smile touched Elena's lips. "She says the same about you, though not necessarily as a compliment. I'll take what I can get." Thomas glanced toward the reservation boundary. "We can't stay here. Blackwood's men will be watching the border. My grandmother says there's another way." Elena pointed toward the eastern hills, an old trail that leads back toward Shadow Creek through Diablo Canyon. "Blackwood's men won't know it." Thomas considered this, so we returned to town. That seems unexpected, Elena finished. Exactly. While they hunt us here, we take the evidence to the territorial governor's representative. He's due in Apache Wells tomorrow for a land commission hearing. Hope kindled in Thomas's eyes. If we can get the newspaper and the ledger copies to him, along with my grandmother's testimony about the treaty rights. Elena gripped the war club. We fight on ground of our choosing, not Blackwood's. Thomas touched the braid of her hair still nestled in his pocket. It's dangerous. Life is dangerous. Elena stepped closer. My mother chose love over safety. I won't dishonor her by choosing differently. In the silver moonlight, surrounded by the whisper of ancient pines, Thomas's weathered face softened. His hand rose hesitantly to touch the beaded ornament in her hair. They slipped out through the back garden, Thomas driving the wagon while Elena sat primly beside him, eyes downcast as a proper maid should be. The blue uniform gleamed in the morning light, a symbol of authority that might just get them past Blackwood's web of watchers. As they turned onto the North Road, Elena whispered, "Do you think it will work?" Thomas adjusted his borrowed captain's hat. "We'll find out soon enough. Either way, we're committed now." The uniform felt both familiar and foreign against his skin, a reminder of the man he had once been, and perhaps with Elena beside him, the man he might become again. The silver commissioner's badge caught the midday sun as Howard Chambers pinned it to his lapel. The territorial governor's representative straightened his already immaculate suit, examining the document spread across the hotel desk in Apache Wells. "This is most irregular, Captain." He squinted at Thomas. "Reynolds, sir, 5th Cavalry." Thomas maintained perfect military posture, the borrowed uniform fitting his role as naturally as his own skin. "These citizens have evidence of corruption affecting the upcoming railroad development." Elena stood quietly nearby, eyes downcast in her role as lady's maid, though her attention missed nothing. Their ruse had worked perfectly. The military escort had accepted Thomas without question when he'd presented himself as a captain assigned to supplement their detail. Elena had slipped in among the domestic staff just as easily. Chambers examined the newspaper showing the railroad route, then the copied ledger entries. "These are serious allegations against a prominent citizen. Blackwood has systematically acquired properties along the railroad route through fraudulent means," Thomas explained, "including using intimidation and manufactured debts." "Manufactured?" Chambers raised an eyebrow. Elena stepped forward. "My father borrowed $500. Somehow it became $3,000 after his death." Chambers studied her more carefully, noting her features. "You're Joseph Blackhawk's daughter?" "Yes, sir. I knew your father," Chambers said, surprising them both. "Not well, but we crossed paths during the survey work 2 years ago. He seemed troubled." "He was," Elena acknowledged, "but not too troubled to sign loan documents with impossible terms." Chambers picked up White Feather's statement, reading it slowly. "Your mother was Los Alamos Apache, and you're claiming treaty water rights?" "Rights that would transfer with the property," Thomas added, making Blackwood's acquisition potentially worthless for his purposes. A knock interrupted them. Chambers' assistant entered, expression grave. "Sir, Sheriff Banks is downstairs with several men. They're demanding to speak with you immediately about fugitives, reportedly traveling with our party." Elena and Thomas exchanged alarmed glances. "Fugitives?" Chambers asked. "A drifter wanted for murder, and an Indian woman who assaulted Blackwood's men," the assistant explained. "Sheriff Banks has a warrant." Chambers' eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Thomas and Elena. "I see. Tell Sheriff Banks I'll be down shortly." When the assistant left, Chambers calmly gathered the documents. "It seems Mr. Blackwood has anticipated your move." "Sir," Thomas began urgently, "the sheriff works for Blackwood. The warrant is fraudulent." Chambers held up a hand. "I'm well aware of the situation in this county, Captain. Or should I say, Mr. Ryder?" Thomas stiffened. "Oh, relax." Chambers tucked the documents into his portfolio. If I were planning to turn you over, I wouldn't be putting away evidence first. Elena stepped forward. You believe us? Let's say I've had concerns about Blackwood's railroad acquisitions for some time. Chambers unpinned his commissioner's badge, handing it to Thomas. Hold this. Thomas accepted the badge, confused. Sir, that badge represents federal authority. While in your possession, any attempt to arrest you without my direct authorization would constitute obstruction of a federal investigation. Chambers smiled thinly, a useful technicality. Elena could hardly believe what she was hearing. You're helping us? I'm investigating potentially illegal land acquisitions related to the Territorial Railroad project. Chambers corrected. That you happen to benefit is incidental. He moved to the window, observing the street below where Sheriff Banks and several men waited. Among them stood Jeb Tucker. I count 6 men, Chambers noted. Rather excessive for serving a simple warrant. They're not here to arrest us, Thomas said grimly. Blackwood can't risk this evidence reaching territorial authorities. Chambers considered this. Then we must ensure it does. He turned to Elena. Miss Blackhawk, my wife is resting in the adjoining room. Please inform her that I've asked you both to accompany her to the territorial capital immediately, via the back stairs and the private exit. What about you? Elena asked. I'll entertain Sheriff Banks long enough for you to depart. My military escort will ensure you reach the capital safely. Chambers straightened his tie. The governor should find your evidence most enlightening. Thomas gripped the badge. Blackwood won't stop because of one investigation. Perhaps not, but it will freeze all property transfers pending review, including your father's debt, Miss Blackhawk. Chambers checked his pocket watch. You have approximately 5 minutes before I can no longer reasonably delay the sheriff. Elena impulsively embraced the startled commissioner. Thank you. Chambers cleared his throat, embarrassed. Yes, well, justice is my duty, after all. As they hurried to the adjoining room, Thomas kept the silver badge securely in hand, their unexpected shield against Blackwood's reach. Through the window he could see more of Blackwood's men arriving, surrounding the hotel. How did they find us so quickly? Elena whispered as they explained the situation to Mrs. Chambers, who immediately began gathering her things. Blackwood has informants everywhere, Thomas replied, but he doesn't know about this. He held up the badge, or that his entire operation is about to face federal scrutiny. The badge caught the sunlight streaming through the window, sending shards of light dancing across the wall, like hope finally breaking through the darkness Blackwood had cast over their lives. Downstairs they could hear Chambers greeting Sheriff Banks with exaggerated courtesy, beginning the distraction that might just save them, and everything Elena had fought to protect. The leather canteen swung heavily from Elena's saddle as their small party pushed through the narrow mountain pass. What had begun as a simple escort, Mrs. Chambers, Thomas, Elena, and 2 soldiers had transformed into a desperate flight as Blackwood's men pursued them into the high country. How much farther to the territorial road? Thomas called to Sergeant Miller, who led their group. The borrowed captain's uniform was now dusty and sweat-stained after hours of hard riding. 3 miles past the ridge, Miller replied, scanning the rugged terrain ahead. If we make it by nightfall, we'll intersect with the main cavalry patrol. Elena glanced back at the twisting trail behind them. No sign of pursuit for the last hour, but she knew better than to hope they'd given up. Tucker was too experienced a tracker to lose them for long. Mrs. Chambers rode beside Elena, remarkably composed, despite the danger. My husband has faced men like Blackwood before, she said, noticing Elena's worried expression. He'll be safe in town with witnesses around. Elena wasn't so certain. Blackwood doesn't care about witnesses. They stopped briefly at a mountain stream to rest the horses. Elena dismounted stiffly, her body unaccustomed to such long hours in the saddle. She uncorked her canteen to refill it from the clear, cold water. Thomas approached, keeping his voice low. Something feels wrong. They should have caught up by now. Maybe they lost our trail, Elena suggested without conviction. Tucker doesn't lose trails. Thomas knelt beside her at the stream. I think they're ahead of us, not behind. Elena froze, her canteen half submerged in the water. The ridge, Thomas nodded grimly. Perfect spot for an ambush. Sergeant Miller joined them, concern etched on his weathered face. We could turn back, try the longer route through Rattlesnake Canyon. That would add a day to our journey, Thomas said, and the commissioner's evidence needs to reach the governor immediately. Elena corked her canteen. Decision made. There's another way. A hunting trail my mother showed me. It's steep, but cuts directly to the territorial road. Suitable for horses? Miller asked skeptically. Barely, single file, and difficult in places. Thomas stood. How long? 4 hours if we push hard. They quickly remounted, following Elena as she led them away from the main trail. The path she chose was barely visible, more game trail than proper route, winding up through dense pine forest and along precipitous ledges where a single misstep meant certain death. Mrs. Chambers proved remarkably resilient, never complaining even as the trail grew more treacherous. As they climbed higher, Elena kept checking her canteen, ensuring it remained secure. Water was precious in these mountains, especially pushing horses this hard. Near dusk, they crested a rocky saddle and paused to catch their breath. Below stretched the vast expanse of the territory, painted in fading gold and purple as the sun began to set. In the distance, a thin line cut through the landscape, the territorial road. We'll make it, Miller said with relief. The sharp crack of a rifle shattered their moment of hope. One of the soldiers pitched forward from his saddle with a strangled cry. Before anyone could react, another shot rang out, narrowly missing Thomas. Ambush, Miller shouted, drawing his sidearm. Take cover. They scattered, diving behind boulders, as more bullets kicked up dust around them. Elena pulled Mrs. Chambers down beside her, the older woman remarkably calm despite the chaos. 3 shooters, Thomas called from behind a nearby pine, on the ridge to our left. Miller fired back, providing cover as they assessed their situation. They were pinned down with limited ammunition and fading light. The territorial road tantalizingly visible, but still an hour's ride away. We need to move before dark, Miller urged, or they'll pick us off one by one. Thomas checked his borrowed service revolver. 4 shots remaining. I'll draw their fire. The rest of you make for the road. No, Elena said firmly. She unslung her canteen and emptied its contents onto the rocky ground. I have a better idea. Working quickly, she stuffed the empty canteen with dried grass and pine needles, then added a small amount of gunpowder from Miller's cartridge box. She explained her plan in hushed tones. Moments later, Thomas took aim at the ridge where their attackers were positioned. On his signal, Anna lit the makeshift fuse protruding from the canteen and hurled it toward the shooters. The canteen arced through the air, landing among the rocks where their ambushers hid. The small explosion that followed was more smoke than force, but it created enough confusion for Miller to grab the wounded soldier while Thomas provided covering fire. They retreated down the mountain slope, using the smoke and approaching darkness as cover. Your mother taught you that too? Thomas asked as they regrouped in a sheltered ravine. Elena managed a tight smile. My father, actually. He wasn't always a drunk. They worked their way down the mountainside as night fell completely, guided by starlight and Elena's uncanny sense of direction. The wounded soldier was conscious but weakening, blood seeping through his hastily bandaged shoulder. The road can't be far, Mrs. Chambers whispered. Supporting the injured man on one side, a distant lantern light appeared through the trees, the cavalry patrol they'd hoped to meet. They were close. Thomas gripped Elena's hand briefly. Your canteen saved us. Not yet, she cautioned, hearing movement in the darkness behind them. They're still coming. As if summoned by her words, a voice called out from the shadows. That's far enough, Ryder. Jeb Tucker stepped into a patch of moonlight, rifle aimed squarely at Thomas. Behind him, Two more figures emerged from the darkness. "The papers," Tucker demanded. "Hand them over and maybe you walk away from this." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between Tucker and the others. "You know I can't do that." Tucker's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then I'll take them off your corpse." The empty canteen at Elena's side suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a reminder that sometimes even the most carefully filled resource could run dry at the moment of greatest need. The golden pocket watch in Governor Wilson's hand gleamed in the lamplight as he checked the time. Past midnight, and the territorial capital's executive office remained bustling with activity, despite the hour. Elena sat exhausted but alert in a leather chair, her torn and dusty dress a stark contrast to the elegant furnishings. "Remarkable," the governor murmured, reviewing the evidence spread across his desk. "Absolutely remarkable." Thomas stood by the window, still wearing the borrowed uniform, though he'd removed the captain's insignia. His eyes constantly scanned the street below, watching for signs of Blackwood's men, even here in the territorial capital. "Sir," he said, turning back to the governor, "what happens now?" Governor Wilson carefully aligned the papers before him. "Justice happens, Mr. Ryder. Something long overdue in Shadow Creek." Elena leaned forward. "My property is secure," the governor assured her. "I've already issued an executive order freezing all property transfers along the proposed railroad route pending investigation. Blackwood cannot touch your land." Relief washed over Elena, though she hardly dared believe it. The last 24 hours had been a blur of violence and narrow escapes. Tucker's ambush had nearly succeeded, saved only by the timely arrival of the cavalry patrol they'd been racing to meet. Even then, Tucker had managed to wound Sergeant Miller before retreating into the darkness. "Blackwood won't give up easily," Thomas warned. "He has too much invested." The governor's expression hardened. "Mr. Blackwood will find his influence significantly diminished by morning." He lifted a telegraph form. "I've already dispatched federal marshals to Shadow Creek with warrants for his arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder." "Attempted murder?" Elena questioned. "Of a federal commissioner," the governor clarified. "Mr. Chambers was attacked shortly after you left Apache Wells. Fortunately, he survived to provide his testimony." Thomas moved away from the window. "What about Sheriff Banks and Tucker? All named in the warrants." The governor tapped his watch. "The marshals should be arriving in Shadow Creek right about now." Elena couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. After days of desperate flight and fear, justice was moving with unexpected swiftness. "And Judge Clark? Suspended pending investigation." The governor rose, pacing behind his desk. "This conspiracy goes deeper than one county, I fear. The Railroad Commission has been compromised as well." He stopped suddenly, fixing Thomas with a penetrating gaze. "Which brings me to you, Mr. Ryder. Your background is interesting." Thomas stiffened slightly. "Sir, you're not just some drifter who happened upon Miss Blackhawk's troubles." The governor picked up a telegram. "According to Commissioner Chambers, you handled yourself with remarkable skill. Military training evident," he noted. Elena glanced between them, sensing an undercurrent she didn't understand. "I served in the cavalry," Thomas said carefully. "That's no secret." "Indeed." The governor handed him the telegram. "But your discharge was rather unusual. Special commendation from General Howard himself, followed by confidential assignments." Thomas read the telegram, his expression unreadable. "You've been making inquiries. I like to know who delivers crucial evidence to my office." The governor smiled thinly, particularly when they arrive in uniform. Elena rose. "What does this mean?" The governor returned to his chair. "It means, Miss Blackhawk, that your champion has quite a history of righting wrongs, though usually with more official backing." Thomas folded the telegram, meeting Elena's questioning gaze. "I was recruited after leaving the cavalry, special investigations for the Interior Department, primarily land fraud cases involving Indian territories." Understanding dawned on Elena's face. You knew about Blackwood before you came to Shadow Creek. I'd heard rumors, Thomas admitted, but had no evidence until I met you. The governor checked his watch again. The midnight train to Shadow Creek leaves in 20 minutes. I suggest you both be on it, with my military escort. Return to Shadow Creek. Elena asked, surprised. Why? To reclaim your property officially. The governor handed her a document bearing his seal. This executive order requires your presence for the transfer of deed. And he passed another paper to Thomas. This authorizes Miss Ryder to act as my special representative during the proceedings. Thomas examined the document with raised eyebrows. This is a federal appointment, temporary but official. The governor rose. Shadow Creek needs cleaning up. I believe you're uniquely qualified for the task. As they prepared to leave, the governor presented Elena with a final item, the pocket watch he'd been consulting throughout their meeting. This belonged to your father, he explained, seeing her surprise. Joseph gave it to me years ago as payment for a debt. I think he'd want you to have it now. Elena accepted the watch, fingers tracing the worn initials engraved on its case. He never mentioned knowing you. We served together briefly during the Apache campaigns, the governor said, before he met your mother and chose a different path. As they departed for the train station, Elena held the watch tightly, this unexpected connection to her father, adding yet another layer to the complex tapestry of her heritage. Thomas walked beside her, his expression thoughtful. I should have told you about my real purpose. Would I have trusted you if you had? Elena asked. Probably not, he conceded. She studied his face in the moonlight. Why help me specifically? There must be dozens of cases like mine. Thomas was silent for a moment. Your mother's name was on a list of treaty signatories I was investigating. When I heard about your father's death and Blackwood's sudden interest in your land, he shrugged. I never expected to find you, or to care what happened to me. Elena suggested quietly. The golden watch ticked steadily in her hand as Thomas's eyes met hers. That was the most unexpected part of all. The marshal's star glinted on Thomas's vest as he stood at the front of Shadow Creek's crowded church. 3 days had passed since their return, and the governor's justice had moved with remarkable efficiency. The church, the only building in town large enough to accommodate everyone, now served as an impromptu courthouse. Elena sat in the front pew, dressed in a new blue dress Martha Holloway had insisted on making for her. Behind her, townsfolk filled every available space, their whispered conversations creating a constant undertone of anticipation. Judge Wilson, the governor's personal appointee, called the proceedings to order from behind a makeshift bench. This special hearing will address the fraudulent acquisition of properties by Silas Blackwood and Associates, he announced. We will begin with testimony regarding Joseph Blackhawk's debt and the associated property claim. Elena rose when called, clutching a worn leather portfolio containing her father's papers. As she approached the bench, she felt Blackwood's cold stare from where he sat with his attorneys. Despite the federal marshals flanking him, he maintained his imperious demeanor. Miss Blackhawk, Judge Wilson said kindly, please present your evidence. Elena opened the portfolio, extracting the original loan document. My father borrowed $500 from Miss Blackwood 3 years ago. After his death, I was told the debt had grown to $3,000. Blackwood's attorney stood. The terms were clearly stated. The interest rate was usurious and illegal under territorial law. Thomas interrupted, stepping forward in his capacity as the governor's representative, exceeding the legal maximum by over 400%. Judge Wilson examined the document. Indeed, this alone would invalidate the debt. Elena produced another paper from the portfolio. This is the original property deed, showing my mother as co-owner. As a recognized member of the Los Alamos Apache Band, her treaty rights to water and mineral access transferred to me upon her death. A murmur ran through the crowd. Blackwood leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorney. "We contest the validity of those rights," the attorney argued. "Miss Blackhawk's mixed heritage disqualifies. The federal treaty makes no distinction regarding mixed heritage," Judge Wilson stated firmly. "The rights transfer by blood lineage, not tribal recognition." For the next hour, Elena answered questions about her parents, the property and Blackwood's demands. Throughout, she maintained a quiet dignity that seemed to impress even those who had previously shunned her. When Thomas took the stand, he methodically outlined the broader pattern of Blackwood's activities: the falsified interest rates, the intimidation, the strategic acquisition of properties along the planned railroad route. Mr. Blackwood didn't just target Miss Blackhawk, Thomas concluded. He systematically exploited dozens of property owners using the same methods. Martha Holloway testified next, presenting the store ledger showing Blackwood's suspicious payments to officials. Sheriff Holloway followed with evidence of threats against those who opposed Blackwood's interest. As the testimony mounted, Blackwood's composed facade began to crack. His whispered conferences with his attorney grew more animated, his face flushing with anger. Judge Wilson called a brief recess, and Elena stepped outside for air. The church had grown stifling with so many bodies pressed together in the summer heat. Thomas joined her a moment later. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "The judge seems convinced." Elena nodded toward Blackwood, who stood smoking a cigar with his attorney across the street. "He still looks confident. Men like him always do." Thomas adjusted the marshal's star on his vest, a temporary commission, but carrying full federal authority. "Even when they're beaten." The church bell rang, signaling the resumption of proceedings. As everyone filed back inside, White Feather arrived with 2 tribal elders. Elena embraced her grandmother warmly. "You came," she whispered in Apache. "To witness justice," White Feather replied, "and to honor my daughter through you." Inside, Judge Wilson called for final statement. Blackwood's attorney argued technicalities and jurisdiction, claiming the territorial government had overstepped its authority. When it was Thomas's turn, he simply opened the leather portfolio Elena had provided and removed a final document, one they hadn't presented earlier. "Your Honor, I submit Joseph Blackhawk's original will, registered with the Territorial Office in Tucson and witnessed by Governor Wilson himself." Blackwood visibly started, his composure finally breaking. Judge Wilson accepted the document with surprise. This wasn't mentioned in earlier proceedings. It was located only yesterday in the governor's personal archives. Thomas explained. Joseph Blackhawk apparently anticipated potential disputes over his property. The judge read silently, then looked up with raised eyebrows. "This explicitly prohibits the property from being used as collateral for any debt, and names Elena Blackhawk as sole heir, with irrevocable title." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Blackwood rose to his feet, face contorted with rage. "That's impossible. He signed loan agreements with the property as collateral, agreements that violated his legally registered will," Judge Wilson stated, "making them invalid from the beginning." Elena stared at the document in shock. Her father, in one of his rare moments of clarity, had protected her inheritance after all. As Judge Wilson prepared to announce his ruling, Elena felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The leather portfolio that had begun this day containing evidence of her father's weakness now held proof of his final act of love. Flawed and imperfect as he was, Joseph Blackhawk had found one moment of foresight to safeguard his daughter's future. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, silencing the uproar that followed his ruling. Its polished oak head gleamed in the church's lamplight as Judge Wilson set it firmly on the makeshift bench. "This court finds in favor of Elena Blackhawk," he declared. "All claims against her property are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwood is ordered to provide full accounting of all similar transactions within 30 days. Elena sat perfectly still, hardly daring to believe the word. Beside her, Martha Holloway squeezed her hand in silent celebration. Blackwood rose slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Your Honor, I request a stay pending appeal to the Territorial Supreme Court. Denied. Judge Wilson lifted the gavel again. The evidence of fraud is overwhelming. Federal marshals will escort you to provide the required accounting immediately. The gavel fell once more, officially ending the proceedings. As the crowd began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the church, Thomas approached Elena. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "Your land is secure." She started to reply when a commotion erupted near the door. Blackwood's voice rose above the noise. "This farce changes nothing," he shouted. "You think you've won, Miss Blackhawk? This territory runs on money and influence, not justice." Two marshals moved to restrain him, but Blackwood shrugged them off, his gaze fixed on Elena. "You'll regret this, all of you." His eyes shifted to Thomas. "Especially you, Ryder. Your interference won't be forgotten." Sheriff Holloway stepped between them. "That's enough, Blackwood. Go peacefully or in chains. Your choice." For a tense moment it seemed Blackwood might resist. Then his attorney whispered something, and the fight seemed to drain from him. With a final venomous glare, he allowed the marshals to escort him out. The church emptied gradually, townsfolk stopping to congratulate Elena, or simply nod respectfully, acknowledgement from people who had previously shunned her. White Feather watched it all with quiet satisfaction before approaching her granddaughter. "Your mother sees this day," she said in Apache, touching the beaded ornament Elena still wore in her hair. "Her spirit is pleased." Elena embraced her grandmother. "Will you stay, visit my home?" White Feather smiled. "For a little while, then I must return to our people." She glanced meaningfully toward Thomas, who stood speaking with Judge Wilson. "You have found a new path now." Outside, the afternoon sun bathed Shadow Creek in golden light. Elena stood on the church steps, savoring her victory. Sheriff Holloway approached, adjusting his reinstated badge. "Banks is in custody," he reported, along with most of Blackwood's men. Tucker slipped away during the night, probably headed for the border. "And Blackwood himself?" Thomas asked, joining them. "Under guard at his ranch while he prepares the accounting." Holloway's expression turned grave. "But I wouldn't underestimate him, even now. Men like that always have contingencies." Elena shivered, despite the warm day. "You think he'll try something?" "I think victory celebrations should wait until he's actually facing a judge in the territorial capital," Holloway advised. "The governor's authority carries weight, but Blackwood still has friends in high places." Thomas nodded. "I'll escort him personally when the accounting is complete." As they prepared to leave, Judge Wilson approached, carrying his gavel. "Miss Blackhawk." A word. He led her aside, speaking quietly. "There's something you should know about your father. Governor Wilson asked me to tell you privately." He hesitated. Joseph Blackhawk was working with the governor's office to expose Blackwood's schemes. Elena stared at him in shock. "My father was an informant?" "For nearly a year before his death." Wilson handed her the gavel. "The governor wanted you to have this. The same gavel that brought justice for your father's work. Joseph may have had his weaknesses, but in the end he tried to make amends." Elena's fingers closed around the smooth wood, tears threatening. All this time, she'd believed her father had simply abandoned his responsibilities, when in reality, was his death really an accident? She asked, voice barely audible. Wilson's expression tightened. "The governor has reopened that investigation." The revelation settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. Her father, gambling, drinking, seemingly irresponsible, had been fighting Blackwood in his own way. Perhaps his deepest debts hadn't been from cards, but from courage. Thomas found her still holding the gavel when the church had emptied. "Are you all right?" She told him what the judge had revealed, watching his expression shift from surprise to grim understanding. "That explains why Blackwood targeted your property so aggressively," he said. "It wasn't just about the railroad. It was revenge. And why he accelerated the timeline after my father died," Elena added. "He must have suspected my father had gathered evidence." Thomas gently took her elbow, guiding her down the steps. "We should get you home," It's been a long day. As they walked through town, Alina was acutely aware of changed glances from townspeople, no longer suspicious or dismissive, but respectful. News traveled fast in Shadow Creek. Martha and Sheriff Holloway joined them for dinner at Alina's cabin, along with Whitefeather. The simple meal became a quiet celebration, though Alina couldn't shake Holloway's warning about Blackwood. After the others had gone, Thomas remained on her porch, watching the stars emerge. Alina joined him, still holding the judge's gavel. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Return to your investigations." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "That depends on what?" His eyes met hers. "On whether there's a reason to stay." The weight of the gavel in her hand reminded Alina of justice long delayed, but finally delivered, of her father's secret courage, of her mother's forbidden love for a man from another world. Some choices, it seemed, ran in the family. The stone headstone stood in stark contrast to the wooden cross it had replaced. Freshly carved and gleaming in the morning sunlight, it bore the simple inscription, "Joseph Blackhawk, beloved husband and father, justice seeker." Alina traced the letters with her fingertips, remembering the father she had known and the man she had only recently discovered. "He would have approved," Thomas said, standing respectfully beside her at the cemetery's edge. "Yes," Alina agreed, though he might have questioned the justice seeker part. Some seek justice in unlikely ways. A week had passed since the hearing. Shadow Creek had settled into an uneasy calm as federal authorities continued their investigation into Blackwood's operations. The man himself remained under house arrest at his ranch, his empire crumbling around him as evidence mounted and former allies distanced themselves. Alina adjusted the wildflowers she'd placed at the headstone's base. "The governor's telegram said they found my father's full reports hidden in his desk in Tucson. Names, dates, transactions, everything needed to dismantle Blackwood's entire network. Your father was more thorough than anyone suspected," Thomas acknowledged. "Even Blackwood." They walked slowly back toward town, the morning air still cool and sweet. Alina wore her mother's beaded hair ornament openly now, no longer hiding her heritage. To her surprise, several townspeople had approached her about her healing skills in recent days, seeking the remedies they had previously shunned. Sheriff Holloway met them at the edge of town, his expression grave. "Thomas, there's news. Tucker's been spotted near Blackwood Ranch." Thomas frowned. "I thought he'd fled to Mexico. Apparently not. One of my deputies saw him last night." Holloway lowered his voice. "And Blackwood's scheduled for transfer to the territorial capital tomorrow." The implication was clear. Alina felt a chill despite the warming day. "You think they're planning something?" "Blackwood's facing 20 years if convicted," Thomas said. "He has nothing to lose." They continued to the sheriff's office to discuss security for the transfer. Alina listened as the men outlined potential routes and risks, her mind racing. After everything they'd accomplished, to lose now because of one desperate last move by Blackwood. "I should be there," she said suddenly. Both men turned to her in surprise. "When you transfer him, he should see that I'm not afraid." "Absolutely not," Thomas said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "My father faced Blackwood's danger for a year," Alina countered. "I can face it for one day." Before Thomas could argue further, the door burst open. Martha Holloway rushed in, face flushed with exertion. "Blackwood's gone," she gasped. "The guards found his house empty this morning." Holloway grabbed his rifle. "How long? Hours? Maybe all night. They thought he was sleeping." Martha's eyes found Alina. "And there's more. Tucker was seen riding toward your property." Thomas was already moving, checking his revolver. "They're after the evidence, or revenge, or both," Alina said, hurrying to keep pace as they headed for the stables. Within minutes, they were galloping toward Elena's cabin, Sheriff Holloway and 2 deputies following close behind. Thomas rode grimly silent beside her, his temporary marshal's badge catching occasional flashes of sunlight. They crested the final rise to find smoke rising from the direction of Elena's home. Her heart sank As they drew closer, the cabin was engulfed in flames beyond saving. She cried, spurring her horse faster. "Elena, wait!" Thomas called, but she was already racing ahead. She reined in hard at the property's edge, staring in horror at the destruction. The cabin where she had grown up, where her mother and father had lived and loved, was being consumed by fire. Movement caught her eye, a lone figure on horseback watching from the tree line. Even at this distance, she recognized Blackwood's erect posture. Beside him sat Tucker, rifle resting casually across his saddle. Thomas and the others arrived, weapons drawn. "There they are," Holloway growled, raising his rise. "No," Elena said, placing her hand on the barrel. "They're too far, and they want you to follow." "She's right," Thomas agreed. "It's a trap. They'd lead us into an ambush." As if confirming their assessment, Blackwood raised his hand in a mocking salute, before turning his horse and disappearing into the trees with Tucker. "We can track them," one of the deputies suggested, "and risk more lives." Elena shook her head, watching her home burn. "No, let them run." Thomas dismounted, standing beside her. "We'll rebuild, and they won't get far. Every lawman in the territory will be looking for them." Elena barely heard him, her attention caught by something gleaming in the grass near what had been her porch. She walked toward it, bending to retrieve a partially melted object, her father's pocket watch, thrown clear of the fire. The crystal was cracked, the case scorched, but it was still ticking steadily. She held it to her ear, listening to the rhythm that somehow had survived the destruction. "They thought they could erase everything," she said quietly, "but they can't." Thomas placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "No, some things endure." She looked up at him, really seeing him for perhaps the first time, not as a stranger, not as a protector, but as a man who understood loss and resilience. "Will you stay?" she asked simply. "Help me rebuild." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "I'd like that." Behind them, the cabin's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Yet even as one chapter of her life ended in flames, Elena felt something new taking root, like the wild flowers that would inevitably return after a prairie fire, stronger for having survived. The watch ticked on in her palm, marking not just time, but possibility.